Born in 1965, Ralph Klewitz grew up in Switzerland and studied visual communication design as well as fine arts. In 2011, he graduated with a Master's of Fine Arts in Contemporary Arts Practice from Bern University of the Arts. And since 2014, he is a doctoral candidate in Fine Arts Practice. The topics of his artistic practice and research in fine arts raise cultural, ethical, and political questions, and he negotiated those in various geographical contexts with meaningful and meaningless, intangible and tangible contents. And with that, I'd love to pass it over to Ralph.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Bethan. That was great. Am I on? Hang on. Am I on the screen now? Can you see me? Can you see me? Yeah. Great. Okay. Wonderful. So thanks for the lovely introduction and everything, and thanks for inviting me. And yeah, you kind of like reading back what I was written, kind of like a bit of a challenge to kind of like fulfill my own standards there. But I'll try my best. And I'll just kind of like, go into the presentation and see what's happening. A few little things from my side, please. Raising hands is all right. I'd rather have the Q&As at the end, so because I kind of like be on the roll, and if people go like, oh, and so on, so then I'm kind of like jumping out of my role and find it kind of like a bit difficult to come back onto my track again, but maybe that's just an age thing. So please use the chat and drop some questions in. You have a spontaneous one, we just to revisit them. I take my about 45 minutes, and so we have then about 15 minutes to talk, or plus minus, if that's all right. Cool. All right. I did not prepare. I've already told the team I did not make a PowerPoint presentation, and I got a bit of like a long noses from Bethan, but it's okay. Don't worry, I can handle that. I kind of like want to cruise around a little bit through my various activities and start a little bit at the beginning. So there's a bit of an improvisation going on here, and bear with me if I'm kind of like jumping or not jumping. I promise not to swear if I don't jump, but it shall be fine. Right. Okay. From that point of view, I guess I'll just take it away. So share screen, and I'm starting with this actually. So can everybody see that? Yeah, can you yeah, what can you see? Can you just sort of like feed back to me, because I don't have a control, I don't have like a monitor window, what's on it. Can you see a little font which is called Weld Science? Yeah, great. So that's a font which I've designed in 2005. And I have it's based upon geometric fonts, and you can download this on my blog as well and use it if you like. It's a font which kind of like I found it inspiring because it's kind of like oscillated between symbols and logotypes, and there's a systematic in the shapes as well, because the whole font, the shapes of the fonts are designed on a grid. So this kind of like in between world, which I already kind of like mentioned, is something which kind of like goes across my practice. And I just show you what I have done with this briefly. So I stop sharing and I start sharing again. It's a little bit awkward, but we're getting there. So great. Can you see an image now? Great, thanks. Nice loading like that. So here, that's kind of like the fonts which I then have played into action. So this is like my first massive body of work. I worked on this like pretty intensively for the period of 6 or 7 years or something like that. And what I have done, this is kind of like a nice example, is like I have kind of like put these symbols into a three-dimensional environment. And they kind of like became like, sculptural. Sometimes they became like communicative. Sometimes they become decorative. And they all have like kind of like various connotations, I suggest. What I also have done with this body of work is like I have combined them with analog photography. And this is my very first camera, which I bought, when I was like 14 years old, so that's quite a few years back. And I still treasure the little thing. And it's just nice to put film in and play around. It's kind of like everything is a long exposure happening there. And I have then kind of like put these symbols into this environment, as you can nicely see here. And that's, I remember that vividly. Also visiting these locations, that's called the Blue Lake, which is a landscape in Australia. So you look down onto like a blue lake, and that camera movement, that's really camera movement. There's no Photoshop in there. It's like, that's kind of like what the analog photography did, which I found quite fascinating. Still nowadays, even the body of work is not that recent anymore. So if I just flick through a little bit, oh yeah, this is the grid of the font. So all the symbols are based upon that grid originally, but then I found this then quite interesting what it is did in various environments. Here, so sort of like, you know, suggesting something communicative, and so on, and always on an example like this, where the symbols become outlined and almost like a spider web-ish thingish sort of things, with a mirrored image, and the design of the composition with the symbols become mirrored as well. So these are a few examples of that rather large body of work. Oh, this one perhaps as well, which has been commented as like a digital impressionism. I found that quite a nice comment, which kind of like talks a little bit about, you know, kind of like an access point of the piece of work, which can be given. So anyway, so I was presenting that body of work at the University of Ballarat at the time in Australia, around 2008, to a body of students which I was teaching, and I had some really interesting discussions and questions from the students coming back, and one thereof was from a student, Cheng, who's a Chinese-born student, who asked that rather humble yet a super intelligent and intriguing question. He said, like, how do I imagine that these symbols would sound like? And that question stuck in my mind, and it did not go away. And it actually then, you know, coming back to Bastian's introduction, motivated me to take this body of work to apply for contemporary art practice masters at the Bern University of the Arts in Switzerland. After a teaching stint was finished in Australia, so I went back to Switzerland, and actually with that question applied for the course, and I got in. And as you might sort of like see here already, there's a lot of like dynamic and movement going on. So the sound and the movement and everything together kind of like gave me like that push, that interest into like what is time-based media, and I started to then creating a large body of work since on time-based media artwork. By the way, this is like I presented, that's a paper which I presented in 2013. So the whole narrative about the story, how that body of work emerged, and including that question, had obviously had like a resonance to topography, one of the specialist fields which I'm teaching. And I presented that in 2013 at the International Typography Conference in Guwahati, which is in India. So kind of like closed that off as well a bit later after the body of work. My academic practice came in, and another way of sharing, which I found very interesting. So now I'm going to jump a little bit into my time-based media. I'll just give you a really, really rough overview. So I have produced about, I would say about 80 to 90 pieces since 2009 on a frequent basis. And I would like to have a little premiere session with you guys at the end of my second last one. The last one is a little bit too technically advanced because it needs like super streaming quality. So if it's a bit jerky, then the image quality it sort of suffers a bit too much. So my second last piece, which is about 5 minutes plus, to share with you. So as you see here, like this is kind of like a nice link. I actually did this then here. I made these symbols move. So those are the symbols which I have made a composition thereof, which you have just seen before. That's me in the forest, and that's a projection which a friend of mine who also studied there helped me to set up, because I was intrigued to kind of like project this piece of work into a forest and see what it did. So it's kind of like a pattern which moves up and down tree stems. And we did not install the sound. It has a soundtrack as well, a crackling sound which comes with it. And it was a test, so we kind of like just wanted to see what happens. It was absolutely mesmerizing, just the whole experience, to put these geometric moving shapes onto like organic into a forest. A little bit haunting as well, but it was a really deep experience. And I always thought maybe one down the line I can kind of like make that installation as like in a loop, so people just can go into the forest and experience that setting. So with this work here, actually, I answered my research question. It took about a half a year. I was fortunate, it was a 2-year full-time study program, so I had still plenty of time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it to be mature age students there with all the young other fellow students. It was a great exchange and a super support and tremendous freedom which I had there as well, jumping between like photography, media arts, music, spoken words and so on. So basically we had access to all the departments, so it wasn't like a set course. It was a very free floating experience. We could go where the project was taking us there, and that tremendously shaped my artistic practice. Just a few highlights. I'm not going into all of them. Perhaps show something that is kind of also a beginning piece, which was quite a pivotal moment, which was so pretty much at the end at Bern, they took us away into like a remote rural area, and we stayed there. It was a very small class as well. I was always fortunate to be in really small cohorts, there were 7 or 8 students. So it was a really great exchange. I never felt as a number in my studies, which I thoroughly appreciate, of course. So there was like an artist team bringing us there, and kind of like just like asked us, what we want to do and stuff like that. And I had no idea. And then I just found that log in the forest, and I had my Swiss Army knife, and I was kind of like rubbing down the bark, so it kind of like created sawdust, and that's all I did. That's all I did for hours no end. I was just sitting there and with my log and rubbing it down. So that was obviously quite a meditative experience as well. Over 3 days, that's what I did, but I had no idea what was happening then. Something in my subconscious mind came into this idea. I wanted then to put this tree trunk, this log, into like soak it into petrol and set it on fire. So that was something which I wanted to do. I had no idea what was happening. The whole thing could have been like blown up into my face. Hopefully it didn't. There's always that bit of a risk there. But interestingly enough, that piece of work was in a landscape which is the home, or close by, the home of a very famous Swiss artist. His name is Roman Siegner. He's a performance artist, and he makes a lot of video art as well. So it's kind of like a bit of an homage as well. And he does a lot of things with fireworks, and he's got something cheekiness in his work. And that's kind of like something which I want to kind of like experience as well. And also like that, unplannable, that uncertainty there. So so that became a performance, and my fellow student Ivan Ebel, he's now working in Berlin. He's very successful as an artist, practicing artist in Berlin. Documented that, and that became that thing. So the whole thing came like, it became like that flame coming out of that meadow. I had like that stick to set it on fire, and then Ivan was walking around it, and then it suddenly gone like off. It was just like, it stopped. It was completely an undramatic event, so there was no explosion, but it had this amazing aesthetic quality, particularly if you come closer in. And Ivan didn't know what was happening as well, so he was kind of like improvising on while the thing was burning. So he'd gone like close, and then he found like these really intricate textures in the flames. So this kind of like woke another area in my practice, which is performance art. And but again, I kind of like to make performances for cameras and not so much for public. I've done both things, but I kind of like prefer that. So again, here you see like an in-between form between the performance and the video artwork and the documentation thereof. Again, something which I found quite interesting. So let me just go a bit further. Something which always plays a role as well is language then. So or abstract language here, like the digit 0 just like floats across the screen, and then it has a soundtrack as well. So the written and the spoken language is always present. Something naughty which I have done here, I set a Barbie doll on fire. Again, I did not know what was happening, but it was really intriguing to watch the thing like melting over the logs and disappearing. And of course that, has a political and a social critical statement in it. And again, it goes like in a big context of our practice. So it's not isolated, it's not something crazy which I did. I was very well aware of like what has been done with the Barbie, and with Ken, by the way, as well. And some action groups in the States and so on. So it kind of like always like builds upon things which are already out there in the art world. This is probably one of my most unspectacular video art pieces which I've ever created, and I still find this hard to top right until now. It's like I have put the camera onto my air conditioning and recorded it for 1 hour, 15 minutes and 50 seconds. The hard disk somehow kept it, and audio and the soundtrack is mute. So I did not even bother taking the sound of the thing. So you just see like this opening and closing of the fan. And there was one moment I thought, this is a great opportunity to put this into a public space. Unfortunately, the curator of an open call did not select it, but I still think it would be fantastic. What it is, it's like a big screen on Federation Square in Melbourne, Australia, and they rent this. Well, not they just like give the space, the projection, the screen, for a few weeks to a few artists over the hot summertime. And whoever has had the opportunity to be in Australia in the summer knows how hot it is. So it can come up to 40 degrees in the summer. And I just thought it would be so nice to just show this, a big, massive image with just that piece on. and just like see what happens as a reaction, kind of like, you know, maybe people kind of like felt a coolness coming from the image or something like that. I still found this a kind of like a poetic experience, which unfortunately never happened. Maybe I find another opportunity later down the time. Great. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to revisit my last work afterwards. So just give you a bit of a glimpse of that body of work, which I was working on, still am. And maybe just in a bracket, this very much moment, I have proposed 4 of my video artworks for a PhD by published works at the University of Westminster, and I've just been involved in the course. This very month, so I'm a PhD candidate. I transfer my doctoral studies from a Finnish university to a UK study, and I'm going to finish it hopefully in a year's time, based upon a video artwork. So it's not like an academic writing, blah, blah, blah. It is like I'm an artist, I make art, I publish my work goes out, it's been shown at festivals, something which I'm proud of. And the academic institution says, yes, we acknowledge this, and you know, you write your 10,000 words, and then we give you a PhD. And I think this is quite nice. Great. So now let's go into the next body of work, which is my sculptures and installations. Again, since 2011, a body of work which I'm creating for more than 10 years now. So perhaps the emerging artist is perhaps not that appropriate anymore. Perhaps more like a mid-career sort of like guy, I think, you know, playing around with stuff, I guess. This is a nice link here on, remember the log which was on fire and me doing like the sawdust. And that is the sawdust actually in situ on that very much location where I put the log on fire. And there was like the very last minute where we had to go home, and I had like that sawdust, and there was the bed which I was sleeping on, and I just put it there, and it just made this really intricate composition. It kind of like really worked because it kind of like connects with the wall, which has like this really nice texture, which is a natural wood, and then it kind of like falls down, and that stuck with me again. You know, it's kind of like a trigger moment of like an image which you create, and you just want to do more of it. You just think I've done something which is like, I don't know what it is, but it's kind of like good in a way, and I want to do more thereof. So and that kept me busy for 10 years, and I did all sorts of things with this. So that's a piece which I've done in Kuching, which is where I was also teaching for 4 years actually at Australian University's Malaysian branch campus. And that's a little LED light which I have created together with the Department of Electronic Engineering, because it was the University of Technology. And I said, can you make me an LED with a little circuit board so I could put it onto like a battery, and just no switch, nothing, just the cables. And then I put this into like that environment, which is like an abandoned house, which belonged to a friend of mine. And I was just intrigued to see like what happens. So that's kind of like the moment where the dawn set in the evening, where it became dark outside, and then you see like the little light becoming much more important. That sequence, that moment again, I documented that with a photographic camera over and over again. So basically all 30 seconds, and just that experience as such was really interesting. And here again, I was trying to find a time where it just kind of like played with the interior and the exterior, and it just like created something very intuitive. Again, you know, Photoshop, that's what happened there, and 2 people were with me there. So the whole experience, again, you know, cannot be like replicated in any sort of like mimetic notion thereof. I give you one more example, which is a sand bucket for kids. And here I was working with the same university's concrete department. So they did some research into concrete, which I had no idea that something like that actually exists. But of course, it's absolutely pivotal important to get your right concrete. Otherwise, houses collapse, bridges collapse, and stuff like that. And so again, you know, kind of like knocking at these people's doors and say, can I make some concrete? I want to fill it into like a sand bucket for kids. And they're going, yeah, all right, why not? So it's kind of like good in that sort of thing, because if you say you're an artist, you get away with quite a bit, and people don't question you about stuff, which I find quite nice. If it says under that, so there's like, you know, you're not kind of like old or crazy, you just do things because you're an artist. And that's kind of like a tremendous freedom, I find, being, you know, like a member of society as well, doing these sort of things. Of course, you know, that when it dried off, it has like a super strong connotative emotion, because I still found this something really unpleasant, you know, because what you do is kind of like you defunct a toy, you freeze a toy, and you take the fun out of it totally by it becoming like, you know, frozen as a piece of concrete. And then, of course, you know, you kind of like spin off with an interpretation, and this kind of like, you know, what I think about this, you know, we comply the notion of the child play and the childlike play, this kind of like notion of a child as a child playing and an adult playing like a child. And these two worlds, you know, of the sand being really like the thing for the kids to play with, and the concrete is also something to play with, but more for adults. And these kind of like things coming together and like freezing off is for me totally loath. And again, you know, making a statement there in a cultural context, I think. Lots of stuff been done then here in Kuching. I had this really nice space. I was living in a really big apartment there, and I had like 2 spaces where I had like, I used as exhibition spaces, which was quite a nice experience. So I made these works, these are like chopsticks and a mop, and I set it up, and then I documented it, and I shared it on social media. So by the way, who wants to see more of my stuff, most of it is on my Instagram feed. And that was a kind of like a good way, because the work which I was producing there in Malaysia wasn't quite like, it hasn't quite arrived yet. At the time, people found it a bit odd. Yet, talking to colleagues, I found I had some tremendously stimulating conversations, and you know, like with the senior staff colleagues, they said to me like, I've got no idea what you're doing, but I show this stuff to my kids, and they really start talking about it. So I found like this generational discussion happening there in a different culture and so on. We were totally enriching. And then, of course, via the sharing of social media, a bit of an exchange with the international artist community there as well. So I did all sorts of things there. And just whatever came into my mind. And again, you know, it's of course, you know, if we do things like this, everything has like they are like live objects and everyday objects, and they're being like you know, is there like an arrangement in there, and what's happening? Some of them are a little bit humorous, kind of like a tongue-in-cheek experience. That's a date. And it's just like a visual, fun thing, which I did. Kind of just enjoyed doing it, and I enjoyed photographing it as well. And then at the end, I have like this photograph. I got the objects, and I wasn't quite sure what is the artwork now. Is it the photograph? Is it the installation? And so I kept a few of these things. I can set it up in an exhibition, or can make a photography exhibition, and so on. So. I've got all these things open. Right, how we do time-wise? I jump into like, so you see like that continues 2018, that's another 255 pieces of work. So you really see like the tremendousness of that piece. I jumped something here, which is like a leg of ham left over from a big Christmas stew when I was visiting my son in Melbourne with a big family, and I didn't want to throw the bone away, so I just did that. And the index sheet always kind of like say where it is, and I find this quite interesting. Because as the information of the space totally informs or helps with the interpretation as well. So that's another piece which I did there as well. One of these rather unique plants which grow there, and these googly eyes which you can buy in DIY shops, and suddenly the whole thing becomes a surrealistic, and the playfulness, and that's kind of like a resonance which goes across the whole body of work. I'm not going into this, but just jumping right onto the last one, this one, which is quite recently I found a little doll's leg on the beach in Bournemouth, and I took it home because I found this is an intriguing object, and I did not know what to do. And then I was playing around with my torch, and I held my torch in my hand, and so the torchlight shines through the leg, and suddenly this kind of like a step out of the void kind of like comes into it, which has a very poetic moment in there, I would suggest. This body of work, by the way, I took that to the Arts University of Bournemouth, where I taught for 5 years now, and in the graphic design program. And I approached the creative writing course, and some of the poets there said, yeah, this is really interesting, let's do something with this, with the poet students. So it's the third time, actually, just this year is the third session we did, where students looked at those images and started writing poems in it, which is an interesting exchange as well, something kind of like, jumping between the different disciplines. And then you hear like the students are reading the poems, and sometimes, I got shivers down my spine, just by the sheer impact, because I'm involved in the visual, and then you hear the language, and then you know where the visual started and the language has taken an idea, a concept or a thought or an emotion or a vision, whatever it was. And then they kind of like the two works have almost like their own existence, right of existence to stand, yet they still communicate with each other. And yeah, so eventually maybe the lecturer wrote a poem as well there. So I have a few now at the moment together, like these images and the poem. And one fine day, if I have enough of them, I probably intend to write an academic paper of this experience as well, which could be quite interesting, I would think, for some fellow academics and artists, perhaps. So I'm closing off that body of work here, and I'm jumping into one of an artist's book, not the last one, also the second last one, which I have created, which is called Freedom to Create. And I'm introducing this a little bit to you guys, also a bit the background story thereof, and why I did this, and what's it all about. So can you see the original? Can you see me as a yeah? So the book actually exists as a printed version as well, in a soft copy and in a hard copy. It's a self-published piece which you can get from Blurb. All the information, basically, just go onto my website, then you find links, and that just brings you to all the places. I've got my blog sort of thing is kind of like a spider webby sort of thing. You go like in the middle, and then you go like all to these different places. It's kind of, it's not that kind of like flashy thing. You're like, oh, the artist, wow, and so on and so on. So the wow effect comes perhaps a bit later on. The blog is rather, it's just a list, it's a link log. So, but that directs you to that book. And you can download this for free as a PDF and use it for your own needs. You can also access it on the Kindle store. And just today, out of our curiosity, I sometimes go and see how it does, go on the stats. And it's been sailing under education as a free book. And and you see like the ranking, and just today it became number 90. So I'm officially a bestseller author for free books, and I quite like this idea. So no commercial interest. It is a moment for sharing, and that's what it is all about. The story a little bit behind is I've been inspired by so many people across my practice and career. Doing all this work, artworks, exchanges, books I read, and so on, so on. And I just felt, a time in my life to sort of like give back, and to the community. And this kind of, it's an essence of my first part of my doctoral studies, which was a self-reflective autoethnography study. That's why I speak so well about myself, because I studied myself so well in an academic context. Yet it kind of like, I was always criticized of like being a bit of a navel gazer. And I always said it's not the case, because if I find out things about myself, I can share this with other people as well. And that's the extract thereof. And that's the evidence thereof, which is now in the public domain. So, it's dedicated to my son, and I'm not reading this. It's kind of like the book as such is a visual experience as well. I did not want to have something which is like a blunt and generic, not perhaps in a Bauhausy modernist point of view, but something which is more like a rather visually exciting. It has its own identity thereof. So the table of contents are playing a bit with the readability there as well. And what it is basically, it is like I'm talking about various topics, and I have put them into categories, and I'm addressing each double page spread with a prompt, which is an affirmative prompt, and I follow those up with 3 questions. And I'm just staying on that page because I've done other presentations where I solely presented that book, which is such an interesting discussion. So I'll just give you that double page spread, elaborate a bit so you see how it works. And then if you like, you can go and get it yourself and maybe bring something for your own practice. So the first question is, sorry, I'll start off with the prompt. Define how much of yourself do you want to put into your work? Just a general question. And by putting that question up, I suddenly, and the whole book, I wrote the text, I did the design and produced the whole thing. It's completely independently made. There's no censorship on anything. So no editor said, can you do this or that and whatever. It's just my thing. And that was kind of like a nice experience as well. To do that like that. So let me just read a few questions, elaborate on them a bit. I have to move my bar a bit away. So how much of yourself, how much do I bring myself into my work, and how much do I take myself out of it? An absolute pivotal question. So for instance, if you think about an applied design context, do I want to be like a graphic designer who wants to shine in the creative industry through my style, so my attitude, or do I want to be like a communication designer who crafts information so it comes straightforward to and arrives at the audience as straightforward as possible without me being in the face of the design as well. So that works in all areas, kind of like really interesting. You can play this through to architecture. You can play this through to fine arts as well, if it's in an applied context. You can play this into music. It's quite extraordinary. So, for instance, if you play, just an example in the music world, if you play an instrument in an orchestra, the whole orchestra's got to sound great, isn't it? And you are kind of like part of it, but you don't want like the oboe coming like standing out like away. I'm like that fabulous oboe player. I'm going to show off now, and I'm ruining the whole orchestra just by my egoistic force, by my egoistic urge. On the other hand side, if I play a solo instrument, if I'm a singer in a band, take Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, for instance, which I had the great honor to see live, see a live concert. Nirvana would be not Nirvana without Kurt Cobain, obviously. So he was such a charismatic figure, and it was so driven by him as a personality. He put everything, like each molecule of his body, soul, and background, everything into his music, and that made it so incredibly powerful. It's a decision he made, and that's why he made that successfully, and that's why he was said, yes, I want to be in my music. And that's what I want. And that's why he was successful through a conscious decision. The notion of the trademark, how decisive is a trademark approach for me, like a style, philosophy, medium that my audience can recognize? I brought that example again of the voice. We all have our individual voices, which I find tremendously interesting. Each of us speaks differently. And the people who live before us, the people who live after us. And that, of course, as a singer in a music arts performance is super important. Just something to ponder upon, kind of like if you kind of like go deeper into these questions, if you don't take them for granted, it suddenly becomes a compendium. And then you can start thinking about this. I do still work with this book. Every time I read one of those sentences, I change my answers. And it really does work. So, the last one on that one about you, how important is it for me to express my opinion, biography, background, etc. in my work? Again, it's kind of like broken down these three questions into like sections to just like zoom in and have a bit of a macro view on it. So, freedom to create, lots of pages coming up there. I'm just staying with that one. And perhaps this is the opportunity to kind of like close that section and go over to the video artwork, which should be in here. If that's okay with you, to kind of like close it off, 4 minutes 50. I'm taking my headphones off because I don't know how it goes. So it probably plays through my speakers on my laptop, so it's obviously not the most great sound. It's not the great soundless experience, but let's see how it goes. So it's called WZ51514. The underscore Vimeo is just the compression. It's a 264 compression thereof. So enjoy. Can you see the full screen? Is it all just a black screen? Can you just give me a thumb up when it starts? I'm just running it out. Is it coming through? Can you see something? All right, sorry. Okay, I'm gonna reshare the screen. Sorry about that. And it's coming up on the quick time. What do you see now? Black screen? Okay. Is it working? Yeah. Okay. And just one more little closing session. I'll show you where this is situated. Can you see that? I'm just reading at the little descriptions of what it is. A storm wind blew over an empty marquee and its collapse was recorded in 3 stages. The resulting clips were then shifted in hue and saturation, assembled and blended via color fading. A male and female computer voice read out a partial sequence of the GOT gene VMAT2. Those recordings were then transposed in pitch and speed, unevenly repeated, overlaid, and composed into a sound collage. With these words, come pretty much come to the end of my presentation.
Amazing, thank you so much. That was so interesting. I think we got a really great overview of your entire practice, which is really great. And thank you so much for joining us for that. we've got a few minutes left. I'd love to open out any questions we have. If you've got any, please raise your hand, or you can put them in the chat. One I've actually just seen in the chat is, what do you prefer the most, video or photography?
Oh, that's a very good question. As you just probably have seen in that piece, I'm quite interested in the merging of the both. So they're actually, it's a static camera, but it's like moving image. So the wind actually blows onto these, but the overblending, it's got like that kind of like that moment in there where you can't really grasp, is it a static or moving image? So I find this quite interesting. I don't know the answer on that, sorry.
Do we have any other questions? Anyone wants to raise their hand or put it into the chat? Oh, is that Andrea? I don't know whether she's typing into the chat or she's...
It's still muted. Maybe she's not aware that she's muted.
Is it going into the chat, I think?
Right.
Oh, there we go. Right. A lot of your work consists of interventions. What are you driven by, and how do you choose which object or place to modify?
Right. That's a very deep question. My goodness, where shall I start now? I think I'm kind of like I'm a very intuitive person in my practice. So when I see something, then I just feel an urge to do it. So at the moment, I make pencil drawings and charcoal drawings in a sketchbook, which I always wanted to do that. It's kind of like just like this idea of like sitting in the public and with your sketchbook. It has something romantic. I always wanted to do that. And when I was in Scotland for 3 weeks in my summer holidays, and I did that in Buchanan Street in Glasgow, sitting out in a sunny day and start doing sketches, and it was amazing. So I had no idea, you know, like what kind of like things, what's in there. So I just kind of like discovered that by having like that dwelling idea, and comes the right time, the right place. And I start doing stuff, and then I become interested in it, and then the drive comes kind of like of the curiosity, because if I did one sketch, I'd go like, oh, that's shit, that's really bad, I can do that better, you know, that the self-critical bastards in all of us. So you do it better, and they think, well, do I really want to do something better? I just want to make something different. So how about I use pencils or use like charcoals? And, oh, that's fun. And then accidents happens. So it's kind of like the drive emerges in the practice as such. It's not kind of like a goal where I want to go. It's just kind of like a development. And these modifications and these interventions kind of like happen in that process, kind of like randomly, unplanned in a way, if that makes any sense, Maria. Good.
Another question in the chat. So your practice is amazing and various in many aspects. Even more, you are an art teacher. Do you ever get inspired by your students?
Oh yes, absolutely, very much so. I was just asked to put a presentation together of first-year student works, and they did a zine which we are running again this year, but we always modify our teaching because of COVID and so on. Interestingly enough, the last cohort was, unfortunate, like in lockdown, like all of us, and but they produced these amazing outcomes. And we wanted to put them onto display. So I was being tasked to make a selection of double-page spreads and front covers of these scenes. And so I just gone through the whole body of work just this very afternoon. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it, what these people were producing at that time. A colleague of mine, we all are super enthusiastic, and we have chats with our students, and he sometimes goes a bit too much. And he goes like, that's so amazing, I can put this into my wall, a first-year student. And then I think sometimes, yeah, okay, I get it, positive psychology, but where is it going? But looking back, you know, this is really like, I must say, really like amazing stuff. And perhaps like through an unprofessionalism when you start the profession, you don't want to get it right. And there's kind of like a playfulness in the work, which is so fresh and inspiring, which goes away. You know, people become perfectionists and they go like, it's not good, I got to make it better. And you take all that spontaneity out of the work. So on this, you know, I feel very fortunate to work with first year students. I love it, you know. It's just the freshness coming in and in a sense, in a good way, you know, in a really good way, just having a go and see what happens. And yeah, that's it. You know, it's hand in time now, put it in, and then yeah. So absolutely, yes.
We've got a few more questions in the chat just as we're wrapping up. We've got 3 more. So, who are your biggest artist influences?
That's a big question. So, goodness me, right? I think that changes over time. Again, it kind of like, you know, it's kind of like if you tap into like a field, you go like, for instance, John Cage. He was a musician, an experimental musician. He taught at the Black Mountain College, which is like, you know, the dream of every, you know, art and design institution, how they taught them. That's kind of like, you know, that's like really like the big one, you know. It's kind of everybody said they're not existing anymore, but he was there. So he was, John Cage was there. He had like already like this amazing practice, and he was teaching over there. And he was writing a lot of books. And I got really sucked into him, his philosophy. He became a Zen Buddhist, and then how he brings his philosophy into his work, chance operations and things like that. So I was starting his biography and, you know, listening to his work, and thought, and I got inspired by this as well, you know, not in the sense of like copying, because he was tapping into such big fields, you know, of knowledge and kind of like making his own things thereof. And that was still is, you know, I mean, he's quite a guru, I think. He of course he's shook by the big things up as well. But again, you know, the sound composition, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, an experimental musician. So when I do my soundtracks, then, you know, electronic music and so on, and it kind of like jumps, you know. But perhaps, you know, the people which I kind of like follow and revisit, like that Swiss artist Roman Signer is one which I follow for many years. And, you know, if there's an exhibition on, I must go, there's no question, and so on. Yeah, so perhaps, you know, a few important ones. They kind of like come in and go, and some of them stay with me for a while as well. Great.
And we've got one final question which we'll end on tonight. Obviously, if you have any other questions, I'm sure Ralph will happy that you drop him an email, and I've linked his website in the chat.
Yeah.
Hi Ralph, I always find it interesting in your works and inspiring. It's just out of the box from where I came from as a graphic designer in a small city here in North Borneo, where people here are quite skeptical about graphic designers. What advice can you give to designers like us to be more brave in bringing out our works without being afraid or being judged?
That's a big question as well. Maybe that goes back to Bethan's question. Again, you know, Alana, just stay with yourself. I know it's tough down there, because if you live in, you know, if you live here in the UK, you know, if you're in Birmingham, in a big city, and I even find it difficult being in Bournemouth. You guys are in a better place than me. You know, I see more poodles than humans here. Sorry, that was really bad. But you see where I'm coming from. Of course, you know, if you're in London, then you're like in the metropolis. You got like, you know, really people dig what you do. You got your community. You turn on your head, and then you're like in another opening. You go like, what? That's cool. Never seen something like that. So that's kind of like the other extreme. If you're in the Borneo rain jungle, as I've been, and Alana still is, that's difficult. That's a tough one. Stick with yourself, Alana. Don't lose your faith in yourself. You were good students, and I'm sure you're still a good practitioner. Follow you on social media, know what you do. So keep it up. You know, keep up what you do most. And find yourself again, find yourself a day job maybe. And as a graphic designer, it's sometimes easier to find a market. But maybe here, just that kind of like, like discrepancy between the graphic designer finds a job in the industry, the fine artist got to struggle and work in the bar. Here you got an example where both struggle, depending on the cultural context and the environment. But do what you like, do what you enjoy best, and put it out. Share it with the community, and maybe you'll find an audience this way, so you don't have to be a slave to the commercials or the people who don't understand what you're doing. Maybe these are my famous last words for tonight.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Ralph. It's been so lovely to hear about your practice, and thank you so much for everyone who has joined us tonight. We look forward to hopefully seeing you at more Round Lemon events in the future. Next week we have artist Lindsay Walsh. For more information about that, visit our website roundlemon.co.uk. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks for the host and everything, organization, and it's really happy, really glad to be here. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.